In this video, we're going to go ahead and set up a basic game flow. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is utilize our game mode, and we are going to have it control what should spawn, when it should spawn, and then eventually handle starting and ending the game. Now the reason I decided to go with the game mode was, why not? I could create a custom blueprint to handle this, or I could use something like a game state or game instance. Probably less likely on those last two. They're meant to hold things more like number of players and maybe some general scores or the time. But the game mode's a good place to hold things such as what's going on in the current game. And since it will be starting, stopping, and then enemy spawning, I thought it would be a good place to put it. Now, let's go ahead and start with it. So we have our game mode. Now, since we haven't done anything in it yet, we want to open the full blueprint editor. Well, let's go ahead and delete anything in there because why not? We need to create a blueprint interface for our enemy spawners in order to control them from our game mode. So they are called enemy spawner. Let's make a new interface called BPI enemy spawner. And we'll go ahead and open that up. Now, even though our enemy spawner, right here, has a function called spawn enemy, we still can't really access that generically from anywhere else using an interface unless we have something to handle it. So usually I like to do a system where this spawner will handle itself, and it's going to handle spawning enemies. It needs to be told to handle spawning enemies by something else. So I try to use that prefix. Doing something and then handle doing something is our interface. So what I mean by that is handle spawn enemy is going to be my conduit or my connection between my interface and whatever is using that interface. So we've taken care of that. Let's go back to our enemy spawner. Class settings, and add BPI enemy spawner, and let's go ahead and handle the enemy spawn. Handle seriously. So let's delete the enemy spawner from our game mode, go into our enemy spawner. Let's go ahead and add it to the correct one. Enemy spawner. That was seriously funny. And we'll handle the enemy spawn enemy event. And all this is going to do is simply call our existing spawn enemy. And that's it. It seems kind of redundant, but the point is this is my interface separate from everything else that things can call. And then this is my actual event itself that I'm going to do something with. So now that the enemy spawner is basically set up and it can communicate with other things, we don't need our enemy spawner anymore. It's done. I don't think we're going to need it anymore. We're just going to need to mess with our game mode itself in order to do something. So, what do we want to do with our game mode? Well, we're going to need to spawn things. In order to spawn things, we're going to need to know what things we want to spawn and where we're going to spawn them from. So, let's start with where we're going to spawn them from. Let's make a new variable called enemy spawners. And we're inside of our game mode. This is going to be of type enemy spawner. So we want object type enemy spawner reference. And then we're going to want to click here and create an array out of it. This will basically hold all of my enemy spawners inside my level. We need to get them. So let's make a begin play. Now I mentioned before about the handling of the getting all for the get all interface. There's not much of an issue if you're going to go ahead and do this in the beginning of setup. So game mode only runs once, and it's only going to set this up once. It's once per map technically, which is actually good because then it's going to make sure we have spawners for every map because you might want multiple maps. Now, we can get all actors of class. So let's say, for example, I wanted to get all actors of class enemy spawner. Well, that would work. But what if I didn't have just enemy spawner spawning enemies? What if I wanted something else? A turret that fires enemies for whatever reason. It has the ability to spawn things, so maybe I want to be able to use it as a spawning point. Maybe I just simply want to name enemy spawner and enemy spawner 2 and enemy spawner 3, and for whatever reason I have a billion enemy spawners. By using the interface, I can guarantee that this thing can have my spawn enemy function and will spawn. So I want to make sure that I get all actors with interface, and we're going to do the enemy spawners, and we're going to just go ahead and promote this to a variable. And of course I already, so don't need that, I already created enemy spawners ahead of time. And there we go, and we'll set that like that, which of course, oh, seriously, this is one of those issues that you run into. Okay, so delete that we started with because it's just a giant pain in the butt, and let's just promote to local variable. I got ahead of myself, of course. Enemy spawners. There we go. Now we get all the actors and then set them as an enemy spawner. So now we can actually call enemy spawners. Now that we have access to all of our enemy spawners, what are we going to do? Well, let's figure out how many waves we're going to have and delays between each wave. We're going to make this simple since we only have one enemy type, and we're just simply going to keep track in a number of how many enemies to spawn per wave. So we'll make a new variable. This time I know I'm supposed to make it. And we'll call this one enemies per wave. We'll make this one an integer array. You'll notice by default it's an array because the last thing I did was create an array. So by default the next one will be an array. And you'll see that is annoying here in a second. So now we have enemies per wave. This is simply, I'll set it up to 3, and it's going to hold a number. We'll go with 3, 4, and 5. And this is saying in our first wave, index 0, we want 3 enemies to spawn. The next wave, 4 enemies, and then the next wave, 5 enemies. We're going to have 3 waves total. Now we have at least a reference to know how many enemies we want. One thing we might want to put in there is a delay between each wave. That's pretty simple. Delay per wave. And no, we do not need, well, so there's 2 ways of thinking on this one. You can have this as an array as well, and there is a separate delay per wave, or we can do it the way I'm going to do it. Make it a single integer and make it a single amount of a delay per wave. And we're going to set this to 10, why not? So my thinking here is basically enemy wave 0 will spawn 3 enemies. It's going to wait 10 seconds, and then it's going to spawn the next wave. Wait 10 seconds, spawn the next wave. And that's going to be our game flow itself. We need to actually code this, but that's going to be our flow itself. So how do we want to handle that? Well, let's go ahead and make a new function. So that way it's not out here. And we'll call it spawn enemy wave. There we go. We'll call it spawn enemy wave. And this should be pretty simple. What we want to do is we have our enemy spawners here, and we're going to need to get something. And then with this something, we're going to need to spawn stuff. Actually, enemy spawners was not the right one. I meant to do enemies per wave. Here we go. Because we're going to use our enemy spawners to spawn. So we need to somehow go through our enemies per wave, and we need to process them. Now, we can use a for loop for that, and that's what it's generally used for. So we'll do a for loop. And we're going to do a get. And then to start off, we're going to just get the 0, 1. We'll go ahead and put this in as our last index, or do our first index as that. And we'll go ahead and hook this up. So what we're doing here, and keep in mind this is not finished, is we're saying, okay, enemies per wave, what's the first value you have? In our case, it's going to be 3. It's going to say, okay, so between 0 and 3, we're going to go ahead and loop. So we're going to end up looping 0, 1, 2, 3 times. Whoops, well, there's a problem. Let's do a minus. This is why it's also good to talk through stuff when you're doing it. And we'll do a -1 here. So now we're going to say, okay, enemies per wave, give me your first wave, 3. Subtract 1, 2. So between 0 and 2, we're going to go ahead and do stuff. So what stuff do we want to do? Well, we're going to spawn enemies. Now we already have enemy spawners in here. So we're just going to keep in mind we're not randomizing anything yet. We're going to slap that in once we actually make sure it works. We're going to get an enemy spawner. Let's go ahead and get the first one. And we're going to go ahead and call the spawn handle spawn enemy. And move this down. And honestly, that might work. Let's see what happens. Spawn enemy wave. Event graph, do we actually have it doing anything? No, let's try spawn here. Spawn enemy wave. And let's see what happens when we hit play. There we go. We had stuff happen. Let's move this one over so I can see it a little bit easier. It'll hit play again. And we'll notice we have 3 spheres. We'll hit play again. And we have 3 spheres going by. And you'll notice they weren't in the same pattern because, again, each time it spawns, it's picking a random value. So we know our code is working now. That's the key. Now we can expand it. So we need to make sure we actually get the appropriate amount of enemies for each wave, because right now we're only getting the first one. And we want to make sure we pick a random spawner to spawn from. So let's do that. That one's a lot easier. What we're going to do is take our enemy spawners, and we want to get a random one inside of our enemy spawners. Now, what do we do if we have the same spawner get called more than once? For example, if you saw in this, in this example, we're seeing, oh my gosh. In that example, you are seeing multiple spheres on top of each other, and that may not be what we want. So we kind of want to make sure that we are only using each spawner once, and that is so simple to handle. We take our enemy spawners and we shuffle them, and what that's going to do is take this enemy spawners array and randomize the values inside of it and put them right back in. It's also really annoying because it's not going to be straight, but there's nothing I can do about that. So now, if we were to hit play, you'll see they come out of there. They'll come out of there. I only have 2 values, 2 spawners, so there we go. And then as you saw, it came out of the other one. I only had 2 spawners, so a 50-50 chance on which one was coming from. But I was getting value 0, and that value 0 was different in theory every time because I've shuffled up my spawners. So whereas it was originally spawner 1, 2, the next time through it might be spawner 2, 1, and the next time through 1, 2 again, or 2, 1. The more spawners you have, the more your randomization is going to be. So we're good there. So that fixes duplicating our spawners. Now every spawner should only be used once, assuming we increment how many spawners every time. And that one is super simple to do as well. That's what's nice about this. A lot of these things, if you think about it, think them through, are super simple. Right here, we're getting value 0. The first time we're going through this loop, we have an index of 0. We spawn, and we get the index 0 spawner, and we spawn the first one. The next time through, now we're at index 1. So if we just take our index and plug it right in there, now we're going to spawn number 1. The next time through, we'll spawn number 3, and we'll continue on. Now here's an issue. This is going to cause a problem. I should get 1 from each, but I should also get an error. And the error was the fact that I didn't have a 3rd spawner, even though I told it to spawn 3 enemies. I only have 2 in the game, but my enemies per wave was set to 3. So you want to make sure your enemies per wave is never higher than the amount of total spawners you have. Let's go ahead and easily resolve that by slapping a third spawner in. Boom, there you go. Now the nice thing is I could do something like this and have 4 spawners. You'll notice those 3 spawned. If I hit play again, we get a different set. If I hit play again, we get a different set. It's randomizing which 3 out of the 4, based on our shuffle, is going to get spawned. That right there is all we need to do. This, I can move this over here. I can probably reorganize this a little bit better. But this is all we need to do to make sure that we are spawning our spawns. That's a lot of spawns there, but that's all we have to do to make sure we're spawning our spawns. Now we do have an issue where we are only doing this once. We're not waiting, for example. We're not doing any of that stuff, and we'll fix that right now. So right now our loop only runs through once. We want our loop to run through multiple times. Well, technically we don't want our loop to run through multiple times. We want a wave to spawn multiple times. So we're going to want to call the spawn wave multiple times. But we want to make sure we only call it the right amount. That should be pretty simple. We've called things before when we were doing this repeating, when we wanted the enemies to spawn every 3 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever number I set it to. We used a timer. Well, we can do the same thing here. What we want to do is do a set a timer by function name, and we want to call ourselves again, and we are called spawn enemy wave. And what this will do is, when this completes, it's going to call the spawn enemy wave again, and it's going to spawn the next wave. But we don't want it to do it immediately. Well, I don't know, what could we do? Oh, well, we could take the delay per wave and plug it into here. Now you notice a small issue here. Well, my delay per wave is an integer, and this takes a float. So we can convert, or we'll just go here, change it to a float. Make sure we change our value, since we've now changed it to a different type. Change it back to 10 seconds. Drop it in there, and boom, there we go. So what's going to happen here? Well, in theory, how it's set up now is we're going to run through here. It's going to spawn everything, wait our delay 10 seconds, and then run through here again. Keep in mind we've set up our enemies per wave to 3, 4, and 5. So if we watch this, we should see 3, and then after approximately 10 seconds, we should see 4. We're not going to, but we should. We're only going to see 3, assuming it fires again. Now, why did that? Why is that? Well, that is because we're telling it to pull always from our first wave. We've never actually incremented the number of waves. We're still on our first wave. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to increment our number of waves. Well, we're not keeping track of it anywhere, so that's a problem. So let's make a new variable called current wave number. And this one we can make an integer, because if we have a half of a wave, that would be weird. Let's get our current wave number. And now we can use the add. So we could do add, and then we could add an integer, or we can use the increment node. Increment int literally just adds 1. And what do I mean by that? It's a macro. If we double click on it, you'll see it takes the value, adds 1, and then sets the value. That's it. It's just a way of doing the add node just in one node itself. So, seriously, can't line up. Alignment straight. There we go. So we're going to add 1 to our current wave number, and then we are going to set our current wave number. Actually, that goes by reference. We might not need this. I'm just realizing if we're doing increment, it might increment itself automatically. Let's find out. Current wave number here. Hit play. And let's see if we get 4 this next time. If we do, then the increment macro automatically sets the reference. Yep, there we go. Cool. So that was easy enough. So, learn something new every day. Our increment macro, not only do we not need the set node after it, we don't need the whole plus and the 1. It's going to take this variable in, add 1 to it, and store the value back into it. We can go ahead and collapse this over here. Let's give these straight because that's annoying the heck out of me. And there we go. Now our current wave number after the first loop is going to become 1. After the next loop, it's going to become 2, and it will continue incrementing. And here, where we were getting 0 originally for which enemies to spawn, now we get our current wave number. So as we come through, shuffling up our spawners, getting however many enemies we need from our current wave, looping through however many times we have for enemies, getting the next spawner, which was randomly set up every time we go through. Once we're done, we go ahead and we increment it. So now we're going to go to the next wave, and then we call our next wave to spawn. One issue you're going to run into, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but an issue you're going to run into is what happens when we run out of waves. We have nothing else to do. That should be pretty simple. We'll go back to our beginning. Because we're always spawning our waves here, we just want to make sure we have a valid wave before we actually spawn it. So let's do an if branch. And this one should be pretty simple. Is our current wave number greater than the enemies per wave last index? Is what we're going to set up. I wish that was straight. There we go. So what this is saying is our current wave number, let's say it's 1. Is it greater than the last index for the enemies per wave? Well, the last index per wave is 2, so no, it's not going to be greater. But now the next time we loop through, it's going to be 2. So now we're on wave 2, which is technically wave 3, but index 2. I gotta love arrays. So now we're on index 2. Is 2, our wave number, greater than the last index of 2? If I can click on that one, where'd my details go? There we go. Is it greater than 2? The answer is no, so it's going to go ahead and, whoops, we probably want to plug this into false now. Again, talking through stuff fixes things. There we go, like that. Is it, let's make it like that, it looks a little better. Is 2 greater than 2? No, so go ahead and spawn another wave. We loop through, now we're on wave 3. Is 3 greater than 2? Yes, we can no longer spawn any more waves, so don't do anything. So actually in this case, for now, we're going to do nothing. Since we don't want to sit here and wait forever, let's turn our delay down to 4 seconds and hit play. We should see 3. We should see 4. And then we should see 4 again because I don't have a 5th spawner. I don't think I have a 5th spawner, right? Yeah, 4 again because I don't have a 5th spawner. And then nothing. It should sit here and do nothing. We've finished the game. Okay, well, that's kind of nifty. So what's left to do? Actually, for this stuff, there's nothing left to do except decorate our map. So let's do something like this. And then we'll do this one over here like this. I don't know, 4, or how high up are we going? That's our player score. So we don't really want to go past that point, right? Probably. Yeah. Okay, so let's not go past the whatever, 3 up or so. Okay. And let's move this one here. Okay. And then let's grab all of these. I have 4 of them selected, holding down Alt and dragging them to duplicate. And then I'm going to keep dragging over. Now if I hold down Shift while I drag, the whole screen will go with me. Make it a little easier. Now keep in mind, there was a reason why we created the arrow. If you'll notice, if these were to fire, they'd fire the wrong way. Let's go ahead and rotate them all 90 degrees, 180 degrees, duh. And now our arrow's facing the other way. Move this back into place. Maybe move these over here. So we get a little bit of our, there we go. There we go. And then we have some more spawners right there. And of course you can move these as needed. But let's, for sake of time, rotate 90 degrees. Move these over and in. Let's see, something like, what do we got, like that, so we can see the arrows. Duplicate again, holding down Alt while clicking on the arrows will duplicate. Let's rotate these 180 degrees and drag the arrows in like that. I'm pretty sure I need to move this one over, right? Yeah. Like that. And there we go. We actually have a bunch of spawners. we were to go into here, now here's the key. We have our game mode, right? But our game mode is not actually inside of our world. So how can we actually edit the settings for our game world? How can we edit the spawns? If you click on your framework and click on your game mode and open it up, under your class defaults, you'll find all of your settings here and somewhere in here under default, because once again, I didn't save it properly. We have our enemies per wave, we have our delay per wave, and we have our current wave number. So let's set our delay per wave up to 10. And let's bump this up. Let's do 10. How many did we make? What, 4? So we have 16 total is the max we could do. So let's do something like 5, 8, and 13, because why not? And I'm going to go ahead and grab the helmet and look around. And you'll notice that we have enemies spawning all around us. And of course, see? And then we have enemies from randomly on our spots, moving at the random speeds we've set up. And of course, if I was to use the gun, I would be able to shoot them. We should get another wave here. You'll notice them moving. Now, I'd recommend bumping the speed up a little bit. Maybe not. If you have a bunch of targets, I guess you don't need a ton of speed. But you'll notice that that's it. And then no more will spawn because we have successfully stopped and we are done with the amount of waves we have. So I know this was a longer video, but it basically created the flow of our game. We're going to need to set up a starting and an ending still. So we're going to go ahead and do that. The next video is going to cover handling our interface that's interactive. We're going to have a start button and a quit button. We're going to have some notification when the player is actually able to play the game. We're going to cover how you might create a fake, basically, interface using the 3D widgets and line traces, and a couple more little complicated things like that. And that will be the next video.